6, but none of those fell on Passover and Sukkot. The next time it fell again on Passover and Sukkot, if you remember in 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, on the 9th of Av, a very significant date in Jewish history, when all the Jews were kicked out of Spain, it was 1493 and 1494 when you had these blood red moons.
On Passover.
On Passover and Sukkot. So each time they happened, it was tied to the Jewish people.
And I feel like interjecting here because Passover is the first of the 7 feasts of Israel. Sukkot is the 7th of the 7 feasts of Israel. JR, what we have here is like a parenthesis around the beginning and the end of the festival cycle, and at each point it's marked by a distinct astronomical occurrence. Now, that's a sign.
That's amazing, isn't it? Gary, let's hear some scriptures on when the sun turns dark and the moon turns to blood. What does Jesus have to say about some
Jesus in Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse, was talking to the disciples, and he made this statement. He said, immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light. And at that point, and let me just stop, when we think of the sun being darkened, the moon not giving her light, we usually think of some astronomical catastrophe, perhaps the sun sputtering and the moon being affected by all this. But maybe it's time to rethink this a little bit and think of it as a natural cycle, the cycle of the eclipses. And this is exactly what you've done, Mark.
Well, according to Mark here, we have, when Israel was born in 1948, these 4 blood moons in Passover and Sukkot. And in 1967, when Jerusalem was taken and liberated, the Temple Mount liberated, we had the 4 blood moons. This has got to be a pattern. So when we have at the end of this coming sabbatical cycle in the year 2014-2015, in the sabbatical year, that's at the 7th year of the cycle, we have these 4 blood moons. It's just phenomenal.
Well, what's amazing to me is when I saw that, I thought, well, hey, now wait a minute. Scripture, it's not in error. I got to look, is there any solar eclipses? Because it said that the sun would turn dark. Okay. So I went to NASA's website and looked at the solar eclipses. And sure enough, there's a solar eclipse on the Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah. Wow. And then I went back, and there's a total solar eclipse on Adar 29 and Nisan 1, right in there at that date. And the reason why that's so significant is because Nisan 1 is the beginning of the religious calendar, Passover 2 weeks later.
Yes.
And Nisan 1 is when Moses set up the tabernacle. That's when the glory of God fell. And so Adar 29 is an ending of the religious calendar, kind of like a new season. And so on Adar 29, leading into Nisan 1, you have a total solar eclipse beginning the religious year.
Okay, let's look at it on the screen here. We have the total solar eclipses on Nisan 1.
Yes.
Or on Adar 29, Nisan 1. Actually, Nisan 1 begins at sundown. Adar 29 is during the day.
Yes.
And the sun we have to be able to see it, so it has to happen during the daytime. And then, of course, the following Tishri 1, 2015, 6 months later. And, that Tishri 1 there is Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year.
Yes.
And there is a solar eclipse. Now, that solar eclipse is not a total solar eclipse. It's a partial eclipse. Nevertheless, it's still of astronomical significance. But I want you to notice here, I've had this animation running, and we see what it looks like in a total solar eclipse. You see the corona around the moon there that's sitting directly over the sun. Now, this we're going to see in 2015 on the first day of the first month, and again on the first day of the 7th month, which is the Jewish New Year. And that concludes, it is Tishri 1 that concludes the sabbatical year.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
And it's time for the Messiah to show up, right?
Yes. Well, to think you have the religious year beginning with the total solar eclipse, 2 weeks later, a total lunar eclipse on Passover, and then the civil year beginning with the solar eclipse, followed 2 weeks later by another total blood red moon on the Feast of Sukkot, all in 2015.
Well, now, if you think that this is a coincidence,
right.
I want you to know that it's timed, you know. You can go into a computer astronomy program and go back in history and forward in history, and there are no more of these for the rest of the century.
That's right. It doesn't happen again. It does not happen again on the biblical holidays.
Now, there are 3 more solar eclipses that you need to know about. And one of them happens this year. Tell us about them.
Well, yeah, what's fascinating is, as Gary read, if these events happen, it says in Matthew and in Luke, at the end of the tribulation, and if that's 2015, you back off 7 years, that puts 2008 as a very critical year.
Yes.
And beginning this year, there's a total solar eclipse, only one. Next year, there's only one. And the next year, there's only one. But they all fall like a bullseye right on the 1st of Av, or the 29th of Tammuz. Yes. And for the Christians, many aren't aware of the significance of that date because we haven't been watching the biblical calendar. But the 17th of Tammuz is when they worshiped the golden calf.
Yes.
It's also when Nebuchadnezzar broke through the walls
of Jerusalem.
Wow.
And by the way, it's also the same day the Lebanon War started 2 years ago. The missiles went through the northern border of Israel the same day Nebuchadnezzar broke through the walls.
Yes.
Well, Mark, I have to just, this is exciting, folks. This is amazing. The thing that grabs me as you're talking about this is the very simple fact that Av is called the dark time in the Hebrew calendar.
Yes.
In fact, there is a period of 3 weeks during that time, referred to as the dark time. And you're saying that this eclipse falls at that period of time.
Not just any time during that period, but on Av the 1st.
Av the 1st.
The first day of Av.
Wow.
That's when the Jews really get serious about lamenting the destruction of the temple. They don't bathe, they don't shave, they don't put on fresh, clean clothes. They take their shoes off, turn the chairs upside down, sit on an upturned chair. They want no comfort during those 9 days from the 1st to the 9th of Av.
That's right.
Wow.
The reason why, historically, it was on the 9th of Av that the 10 spies brought the bad report and didn't want the land. They despised it. Because of that, that day has been cursed in Jewish history. When Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple, it was on the 9th of Av.
Yes.
And 600 years later, when Rome destroyed the temple, it was on the same day, the 9th of Av.
Yes.
All the Jews were kicked out of England in 1290 on the 9th of Av. All the Jews were kicked out of Spain in 1492 on the 9th of Av. World War I started on the 9th of Av. Hitler's proclamation to kill the Jews was on the 9th of Av. And they evacuated the Gaza Strip at sunset on the 9th of Av, the same day they rejected the land 3,500 years ago. And so it's known as the Dire Straits. And on the 1st of Tammuz, 1st of Av, is right in the middle of those dire straits. We have these solar eclipses 3 years in a row.
Wow.
Tell us the significance in Jewish writings about what a solar eclipse stands for and what the lunar eclipse stands for.
Yes, and this is very fascinating. First off, Zechariah 8:19 is a very key verse because it mentions these 4 fast days. And in Jewish writings, blood red moon bads bode for Israel. But a total solar eclipse means bad news for the nations.
The Gentile
The Gentile nations. And in Zechariah 8:19, in the context of these fast days, God says he's going to turn these fasting days into days of great joy. In other words, the nations are going to be judged during that time. And so here, right in the middle, for the next 3 years, we see judgment coming upon the nations by having this total solar eclipse right in the midst.
Oh, wow. Now, please understand, there's coming a solar eclipse this summer on the 1st of Av.
July 31st, August 1st, right in there.
Okay. And then next year, there'll be another one on the 1st of Av. And the next year, another one on the 1st of Av. That sounds really significant because we're right in the middle of the dark time and we're going to have a dark sun. Isn't that amazing?
Yes. Yes.
The sun's going to be eclipsed. So this is mind-blowing. This is really mind-blowing. Please understand that this is a sabbatical year. The next 7-year cycle begins this coming September 29th with the new moon of September, Rosh Hashanah, and will run for 7 years. Could this be Daniel's 70th week? It's possible. We can't tell you that it will be, but listen, if the world goes to war, then we'll know. We will know, right?
I think there's a good chance there will be a war this summer. To me, it's the whole insanity of dividing Jerusalem and dividing the land as well. If they try to divide Jerusalem and create a Palestinian state, to me, that is really going to be the trigger.